"Commander, if you knew who was sitting in that room, you wouldn't be giving that order." The words came through the earpiece in a nervous whisper, but Commander Ethan Brooks ignored them. He stood in the center of the operations floor, surrounded by agents, analysts, and members of his SEAL team. Beyond the reinforced glass walls of the federal building's conference wing, alarms remained silent. Computers continued humming, and dozens of government employees moved through their morning routines. Yet every eye seemed fixed on a single room at the end of the corridor. Inside sat a woman who looked completely out of place. Charlotte Hayes occupied a chair near the far end of a long conference table. She wore a simple navy blazer over a white blouse, dark slacks, and low-heeled shoes. No visible badge, no visible rank, no indication that she possessed any authority whatsoever. A closed folder rested in front of her. Beside it sat a paper coffee cup that had long since gone cold. While federal agents rushed through hallways and security personnel coordinated with tactical teams, Charlotte appeared more interested in reading a document than acknowledging the growing tension around her. Ethan watched through the glass. Something about her calm demeanor irritated him. Most people became anxious when a federal facility entered lockdown. Most people asked questions. Most people wanted answers. Charlotte Hayes did none of those things. She simply turned another page. Still no identification match? Ethan asked. An intelligence analyst shook his head. "Nothing, sir. We ran every database available. Employment records, contractor records, federal clearance lists. It's like she doesn't exist." Ethan frowned. In 20 years of military service, he had learned that people who didn't exist on paper usually created problems in real life. The building had been flagged that morning after irregular activity appeared inside a classified communications network. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to trigger an immediate response. Within 40 minutes, Ethan's SEAL unit had been deployed to secure the location until investigators determined what had happened. Since arriving, every lead pointed toward the same conference room. The same woman. The same unanswered questions. Yet Charlotte showed no signs of concern. She never asked why armed operators were outside her door. She never requested legal counsel. She never attempted to leave. She simply sat there as if she already knew how the day would end. One of the younger agents approached Ethan. "Sir, several employees say she arrived before sunrise." "Alone?" Ethan asked. "Yes, sir." "Anyone speak with her?" "Only briefly. They assumed she was expected." Ethan glanced back toward the glass. Charlotte lowered her eyes to the folder again and calmly turned another page. The motion was unhurried, almost deliberate. "That confidence bothers me," one SEAL operator muttered beside him. Ethan nodded slightly. It bothered him too. He had encountered hostile leaders, foreign officials, intelligence officers, and executives who believed their titles protected them. Charlotte felt different. There was no arrogance, no nervousness, no attempt to impress anyone. Just absolute certainty. Down the hallway, two security officers exchanged worried looks. A receptionist quietly gathered files from a nearby desk. Conversations became whispers. Even people who knew nothing about the situation sensed something unusual unfolding. Meanwhile, the woman at the center of it all remained perfectly composed. Ethan checked the time. The situation had already stretched longer than expected. Whatever answers existed, they were inside that room. He straightened his posture and began walking toward the conference door. Behind him, several operators followed. Across the hallway, conversations stopped. Employees watched from a distance. Charlotte finally looked up as the footsteps approached. Her blue eyes met Ethan's through the glass. For the first time all morning, she closed the folder. Then she offered the faintest hint of a smile, as if she had been expecting him to arrive at that exact moment. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The conference room remained silent except for the faint hum of the ventilation system overhead. Commander Ethan Brooks stopped a few feet from the table and studied the woman carefully. Charlotte Hayes leaned back slightly in her chair, her hands resting calmly on the closed folder. She showed none of the nervous habits people usually displayed under pressure. No tapping fingers, no shifting posture, no restless glances toward the door. She simply watched him with the same quiet confidence that had unsettled everyone in the building all morning. Ethan reached for the identification badge clipped to his vest. "Charlotte Hayes?" he asked. "That is what people call me," she replied. Her answer immediately drew a look from one of the agents standing outside the room. Ethan remained expressionless. You understand this facility is under federal security review. I do. Then you understand why I have questions. I assumed that was why you came. Her voice was calm and measured, almost conversational. Ethan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Through the glass walls, employees watched from their desks while pretending not to. The entire floor seemed to have developed a sudden interest in paperwork. Let us start simple, Ethan said. Why are you here? Charlotte glanced toward the folder. Working. On what? Documents. Ethan exhaled slowly. You understand that is not an answer. It is the answer I can give. Outside the room, Agent Melissa Turner folded her arms. She had spent the last hour helping analysts search every available database. Nothing made sense. Charlotte possessed no accessible personnel file, no government contractor history, no public employment record. Even her listed address led to a property that appeared vacant. The deeper they searched, the stranger the situation became. Back inside the conference room, Ethan slid a tablet across the table. We cannot verify your credentials. Charlotte looked at the screen but made no effort to touch it. That must be frustrating. It is becoming a problem. For whom? Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly. You seem very comfortable for someone surrounded by federal investigators. Should I be uncomfortable? Most people would be. Charlotte offered a faint smile. Most people are not me. The answer hung in the air. Ethan had dealt with diplomats, intelligence officers, and executives before. Many projected confidence. Most eventually revealed anxiety when pressed long enough. Charlotte appeared immune to the process. It was as though she already knew every question before it was asked. One of the younger analysts hurried down the hallway carrying a tablet. He stopped beside Agent Turner and lowered his voice. We found something. What? Not much. Just a reference buried inside an archived authorization request from 9 years ago. Turner looked up immediately. What kind of authorization? The entire document is redacted. Everything. Everything except 2 words. Turner frowned. Which words? The analyst swallowed. Charlotte Hayes. Turner looked through the glass at the woman sitting inside the conference room. For the first time all morning, a chill ran down her spine. Back at the table, Ethan leaned forward. Miss Hayes, I am going to ask again. What exactly is your role here? Charlotte looked directly into his eyes. Commander Brooks, have you ever been assigned to a mission without being told the entire story? Ethan did not answer. He had spent much of his career doing exactly that. Sometimes, Charlotte continued, people only receive the information necessary for their part of the operation. Are you suggesting that applies here? I am suggesting that assumptions are dangerous. The room grew quiet again. Ethan studied her face carefully. She was not mocking him. She was not threatening him. If anything, she sounded almost concerned. That bothered him more than arrogance would have. Before he could respond, the door opened and Agent Turner stepped inside. Her expression had changed. Commander, she said carefully, we need to talk. Ethan glanced at Charlotte, then stood from his chair. As he reached the doorway, he noticed something unusual. Charlotte was not watching him leave. Instead, she had already reopened the folder and returned to reading, as though the outcome of the conversation was no longer important. And somehow, that made Ethan even more certain that the woman in that room knew something nobody else did. Agent Melissa Turner led Commander Ethan Brooks away from the conference room and into a smaller office overlooking the operations floor. The moment the door closed, she handed him a tablet. Ethan scanned the screen while 2 analysts stood nearby, both looking unusually uneasy. Tell me this is incomplete, Ethan said. We thought it was, Turner replied. Then we checked 3 more archives. Ethan continued reading. Every section surrounding Charlotte Hayes had been heavily restricted. Dates were missing. Names were removed. Entire pages had been replaced by authorization codes. Yet her name kept appearing. Not often. Just enough to create more questions than answers. What exactly am I looking at? Ethan asked. One analyst cleared his throat. We are not sure, sir. That is not helpful. It is the truth. The analyst pointed to a sequence of records. Every time her name appears, access levels jump beyond anything we normally see. Ethan frowned. During his military career, he had worked alongside intelligence agencies and special operations commands. He understood classification systems. He understood restricted access. What he did not understand was why a woman who supposedly did not exist seemed to leave traces inside some of the most protected records in the government. Turner folded her arms. There is more. Ethan looked up. Go ahead. The archived authorization request from 9 years ago. What about it? We finally located the originating office. And Turner hesitated. The office no longer exists. Silence filled the room. Ethan stared at her for several seconds. What do you mean it no longer exists? It was dissolved years ago. Then why are its records still active? That is the part nobody can explain. Across the hallway, Charlotte Hayes remained seated alone inside the conference room. She slowly reviewed another page from the folder resting before her. Employees occasionally glanced through the glass walls, but nobody approached. The atmosphere around her had changed. Earlier that morning, people viewed her as an inconvenience. Now uncertainty had replaced confidence. Rumors traveled quickly through federal buildings. By noon, half the floor seemed aware that something unusual was happening. Charlotte appeared completely unaffected. She checked her watch once, made a small note in the margin of a document, and returned to reading. Back inside the office, Ethan studied the information again. None of it answered the most important question. Why was she here? Have we found any connection to the network irregularities? He asked. Nothing direct, Turner replied. Every lead keeps circling back to her presence in the building. That is not evidence. I know. Ethan walked to the window. Through the glass, he could see members of his SEAL team maintaining security positions throughout the floor. Every operator trusted his judgment. Every operator expected answers. At the moment, he had none. That bothered him more than he cared to admit. A notification suddenly appeared on the analyst's monitor. The young man leaned forward. Sir. Ethan turned. What now? The analyst looked surprised. We received a response from headquarters. Already? Yes, sir. What does it say? The analyst read silently for several moments before looking up. His expression had changed completely. That is strange. Ethan stepped closer. Read it. The analyst swallowed. The response says we are not authorized to request information regarding Charlotte Hayes. The room fell silent. Not authorized? Ethan repeated. We are the assigned security team. I know, sir. Who denied the request? The analyst stared at the screen. It does not say. Turner moved beside him. There has to be a source. There usually is. And this time, the analyst slowly shook his head. This time there is only a reference number and one instruction. Ethan felt a growing sense that the situation was moving beyond normal procedure. What instruction? The analyst read the message again. Then he looked directly at Ethan. Maintain current security posture. Do not interfere with Charlotte Hayes. Across the corridor, Charlotte calmly turned another page as if she already knew exactly what the message would say. The message changed everything and nothing at the same time. On paper, Commander Ethan Brooks now had instructions from a level above his authority. In reality, he still stood inside a federal facility with unanswered questions, an unidentified woman at the center of an investigation, and an entire security operation waiting for direction. Ethan stared at the monitor for several seconds before turning away. Around him, analysts exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody seemed comfortable with what they had just read. Orders in government systems usually came with explanations, approval chains, or at least recognizable signatures. This message carried none of those things. It simply existed, unquestioned and unchallengeable. Agent Melissa Turner broke the silence first. What do we do now? Ethan folded his arms. We continue doing our job. Meaning I still need answers. Turner nodded slowly. She understood his position. The instruction said not to interfere with Charlotte Hayes. It did not say they had to stop asking questions. Across the operations floor, activity resumed, but the mood had shifted. Earlier, people had assumed the investigation would conclude quickly. Now uncertainty spread through the building like a storm cloud. Employees whispered in break rooms. Analysts quietly searched records they were probably not supposed to search. Supervisors checked authorization lists twice. Yet every path ended the same way. Charlotte Hayes, the woman who officially seemed to be nobody. Ethan eventually stepped back into the hallway overlooking the conference room. Through the glass walls, Charlotte remained seated exactly where she had been all day. The folder was still open. Her attention remained fixed on its contents. She appeared so calm that it almost felt intentional, as if she knew every reaction her presence would trigger. One of Ethan's operators approached. Sir, what is it? We received another request from building management. For what? They want to know when normal operations can resume. Ethan looked toward the conference room. Tell them not yet. The operator hesitated. Some people are getting nervous. So am I. The operator almost smiled before returning to his position. Ethan watched Charlotte for another moment. Something about the entire situation bothered him beyond the missing records and restricted files. Most people who possessed influence eventually revealed it. They dropped names, mentioned titles, made subtle threats. Charlotte had done none of those things. She never demanded special treatment. She never claimed authority. She simply existed within a level of confidence that suggested she had absolutely nothing to prove. Meanwhile, on the second floor of the building, a senior systems analyst named David Mercer sat alone in a secure records office. He had spent nearly 4 hours tracing fragments of archived data connected to Charlotte Hayes. Most searches ended in dead ends. One finally returned something different. David leaned closer to his monitor. The file was decades old. The classification banner alone covered half the screen. He was not authorized to open it, but a summary line remained visible. His eyes widened. He read it twice to make sure he was not imagining it. Then he immediately picked up the phone and called Agent Turner. 10 minutes later, Turner entered the records office. What did you find? David pointed at the screen. I do not know what this means, but I thought you should see it. Turner examined the summary. Her expression changed instantly. Is this real? As far as I can tell, the summary contained only one sentence. One sentence buried inside a restricted archive nearly 15 years old. Yet it was enough to make Turner's heart race. She stared at the words again. Then she left the office without another question. Moments later, she found Ethan standing outside the conference room. Commander, she said quietly. Ethan looked up. What happened? Turner handed him the printed page. Ethan read the sentence once, then a second time. The document did not identify Charlotte Hayes as an employee, contractor, witness, or suspect. Instead, it described her as a strategic asset operating under direct executive authorization. Ethan slowly lowered the page and looked through the glass toward the woman sitting alone at the table. For the first time all day, he began to wonder whether everyone in the building had been asking the wrong questions from the very beginning. Commander Ethan Brooks remained motionless for several seconds after reading the document. The hallway around him continued operating as normal, yet it no longer felt normal. Agents walked past carrying reports. Analysts moved between offices. Phones rang in the distance. But Ethan's attention remained fixed on a single line of text. Strategic asset operating under direct executive authorization. The wording was unlike anything he had encountered before. It was intentionally vague while somehow carrying enormous weight. Beside him, Agent Melissa Turner watched his reaction carefully. I take it you have never seen terminology like that before, she said quietly. Ethan handed the paper back. Not in a file that was supposed to be invisible. Turner glanced toward the conference room. Charlotte Hayes sat exactly where she had been all day. Sunlight from the western windows now stretched across the floor, casting long shadows through the glass walls. Hours had passed since the lockdown began, yet Charlotte appeared completely unconcerned by the delay. She reviewed another page from her folder and occasionally made notes with a black pen. Nothing about her behavior suggested uncertainty. Ethan had spent years learning how people reacted under pressure. Nervous people talked too much. Confident people became defensive. Experienced professionals maintained control for a while before eventually revealing frustration. Charlotte fit none of those categories. She behaved like someone who already understood the final outcome. That realization bothered him more than any classified document. I want every available record connected to executive authorization programs, Ethan said. Turner raised an eyebrow. You think we will actually get access? Probably not. Then why ask? Ethan looked through the glass again. Because somebody wants us to stop looking. Across the operations floor, analysts continued digging through archives despite repeated access denials. Most searches returned nothing. A few returned warnings. One returned a message that simply instructed users to contact a restricted office that no longer existed. Every new discovery created additional confusion. Meanwhile, Charlotte remained patient. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a building administrator cautiously approached the conference room. He carried a clipboard and looked uncomfortable before he even reached the door. Ethan observed from a distance. The administrator opened the door slightly and spoke with Charlotte for less than 30 seconds. Then he nodded several times, thanked her, and left. Ethan immediately intercepted him in the hallway. What was that about? The administrator looked surprised. Nothing important, sir. Then why did you look nervous? Because I was told to ask whether she needed anything. And she asked for a fresh cup of coffee. Ethan blinked. That is all. Yes, sir. The administrator hesitated. Although she did say something unusual, Ethan folded his arms. What exactly did she say? The administrator thought for a moment. She said everyone seems to be working very hard to answer a question that will answer itself soon enough. Ethan watched the man walk away. Those words stayed with him longer than he expected. Answer itself soon enough. It sounded less like a prediction and more like certainty. Minutes later, another analyst hurried across the floor carrying a printed report. Commander. Ethan turned. What now? We found a travel authorization. For Charlotte. Yes, sir. Ethan took the report. Unlike every previous document, this one was not completely redacted. Most of the information remained hidden, but one detail stood out immediately. Charlotte Hayes had visited locations associated with senior government leadership, advanced research programs, and high-level strategic planning groups. The pattern stretched back more than a decade. Ethan slowly lowered the report. The pieces still did not fit together, but they were beginning to form an outline. Not the outline of a suspect. Not the outline of a witness. Something else entirely. As he looked through the conference room glass once more, Charlotte suddenly closed her folder and checked her watch. It was the first meaningful change in her routine all day. Then she looked toward the hallway and smiled faintly, as if she had just remembered an appointment. Somehow Ethan knew she was not waiting for permission, instructions, or explanations. She was waiting for something else. And whatever it was, he had the growing feeling it was about to arrive. The late afternoon sunlight had begun to fade when the atmosphere inside the federal building changed once again. It was subtle at first. A few analysts stopped talking. Several supervisors checked their phones almost simultaneously. Conversations that had filled the operations floor throughout the day gradually disappeared. Commander Ethan Brooks noticed it immediately. Years of operational experience had taught him to recognize shifts in a room long before anyone explained them. Something was happening. He just did not know what. Across the hallway, Charlotte Hayes remained seated inside the conference room. Her folder was now closed. The black pen rested neatly on top of it. For the first time since arriving that morning, she appeared completely finished with her work. She sat quietly, watching the fading sunlight reflect against the glass walls. There was no impatience in her expression, no expectation, only the same calm certainty she had displayed from the beginning. Agent Melissa Turner approached Ethan, carrying another tablet. You need to see this. Ethan accepted it. The screen displayed an internal notification that had just appeared throughout multiple secure networks. Most of the message was classified, but one line remained visible. Immediate executive review in progress. Ethan looked up. Executive review of what? Turner shook her head. Nobody knows. Who initiated it? That information is restricted. Ethan almost laughed. By now he was beginning to suspect every answer in the building would eventually be labeled restricted. Before he could respond, another analyst hurried toward them. Commander, what is it now? We just received notice that several senior officials are joining a secure conference call within the hour. Ethan frowned. Related to this facility? Apparently. Related to Charlotte Hayes? The analyst hesitated. Nobody will confirm that, sir. Which sounded very much like a confirmation. Ethan looked through the glass toward Charlotte. She happened to glance in his direction at that exact moment. Neither spoke. Yet Ethan felt the strange sensation that she already knew about the executive review, the conference call, and every development currently unfolding around them. The realization was becoming impossible to ignore. Throughout the day, everyone had treated Charlotte as the mystery. Now it increasingly felt as though she was the only person who understood the situation. 40 minutes later, the operations floor had become unusually quiet. Computer screens displayed waiting messages. Analysts monitored secure channels. Supervisors remained near their offices. Even Ethan's SEAL operators sensed that something important was approaching. Then it happened. A secure satellite phone attached to Ethan's vest suddenly began to ring. The sound instantly drew attention from everyone nearby. Ethan looked down at the device. Very few people possessed that number. Fewer still used it. The display showed no caller identification, just a secure routing code. Agent Turner stared at the phone. Are you going to answer it? Ethan already knew the question was unnecessary. He pressed the connection button and lifted the phone to his ear. Commander Brooks. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and immediately recognizable. Ethan stood a little straighter. The caller occupied a position far above his operational chain of command. "Sir," Ethan said. Around him, several agents exchanged worried looks. They could hear only Ethan's side of the conversation. "Understood," Ethan replied after several seconds. His expression changed. "Yes, sir." Another pause. "I understand completely." Turner watched carefully. She had spent most of the day working alongside Ethan. She had never seen him react this way. Not nervous, not intimidated, simply surprised. Very surprised. Ethan listened for nearly a minute before finally speaking again. "There is one thing I need clarified." Silence followed. Then Ethan nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir." The line disconnected. For several moments he remained motionless, staring at the phone in his hand. The entire floor seemed frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Everyone waited. Finally, Turner stepped closer. "Commander?" Ethan lowered the phone. His eyes moved toward the conference room. Through the glass, Charlotte Hayes was already standing beside the table. She gathered her folder, adjusted her blazer, and calmly prepared to leave as though she had known the call was coming all along. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Commander Ethan Brooks stood in the middle of the operations floor holding the silent satellite phone while dozens of eyes remained fixed on him. Agent Melissa Turner could immediately tell that whatever he had just heard was unlike anything they had expected. Ethan had spent an entire day chasing answers through classified records, restricted databases, and conflicting instructions. Now, for the first time, he possessed a piece of the truth. The problem was that the truth seemed even more unbelievable than the mystery. Slowly, Ethan slipped the phone back onto his vest. Across the hallway, the conference room door opened. Charlotte Hayes stepped into the corridor, carrying her folder beneath one arm. She looked exactly the same as she had that morning. The same navy blazer, the same calm expression, the same quiet confidence. Yet everything around her had changed. Analysts who had spent hours investigating her suddenly avoided direct eye contact. Supervisors lowered their voices. Even the atmosphere of the building felt different. It was as though an invisible line had been crossed, and everyone sensed it at the same time. Charlotte began walking down the hallway toward the elevator lobby. She was neither hurried nor cautious. She simply walked with the relaxed pace of someone leaving an ordinary workday. Ethan watched her for several moments before finally stepping forward. "Miss Hayes." Charlotte stopped and turned. "Commander." Ethan noticed that she did not sound surprised. If anything, she seemed to have expected the conversation. "I received a call," he said. "I know." Several nearby agents exchanged glances. Turner remained silent. Charlotte's response had been so immediate that it almost sounded rehearsed. Ethan studied her carefully. "Do you always know what is coming?" A faint smile appeared. "No, only the important things." The answer should have sounded arrogant. Somehow it did not. Charlotte spoke as though she were stating a simple fact. Ethan glanced around the hallway. Every person nearby was pretending not to listen while clearly listening to every word. "The caller informed me that this operation was never intended to investigate you." Charlotte nodded once. "That is correct." "Then why were we sent here?" "Because someone wanted to know whether a security breach existed." "And did it?" Charlotte looked toward the windows overlooking the city skyline. The sun was nearly gone now. Lights from surrounding buildings were beginning to appear. "That depends on how you define breach." Ethan frowned. "That sounds like another incomplete answer. Most important answers are." For the first time all day, Charlotte seemed almost amused. Not at Ethan, not at the situation. Simply amused by how events had unfolded. Agent Turner finally stepped closer. "We searched every database we could access." Charlotte looked at her. "I know." "You knew?" "I assumed you would." Turner folded her arms. "You were not concerned?" "Should I have been?" The question instantly reminded Ethan of their first conversation. It struck him that Charlotte had been giving the same answer all day in different forms. Not because she was avoiding questions, because she had never viewed herself as being in danger of scrutiny. She had been operating from an entirely different understanding of the situation. Ethan exhaled slowly. "The person who called me said your presence here was authorized at levels beyond my clearance." "That is also correct. And that the executive review taking place this afternoon concerns work you completed before we arrived." Charlotte's expression did not change. "Yes." Silence followed. Then Ethan asked the question that had been bothering him since morning. Who exactly are you? For the first time all day, Charlotte did not answer immediately. She looked at Ethan, then at the agents, analysts, and operators watching from a distance. Finally, she adjusted the folder beneath her arm and spoke in a calm voice. Commander, the better question is not who I am. Ethan waited. Charlotte glanced toward the elevator doors as they quietly opened at the end of the hallway. Then she looked back at him. The better question is who everyone thinks is giving the orders. The elevator doors remained open, but nobody moved. Charlotte Hayes stood calmly in the hallway while her final question lingered in the air. The better question is who everyone thinks is giving the orders. Commander Ethan Brooks stared at her. Around them, agents, analysts, and operators waited in complete silence. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Nobody wanted to leave. After an entire day of unanswered questions, everyone sensed they were finally approaching the truth. Ethan took a slow breath. Then tell me. Charlotte studied him for a moment. Most people imagine power as something visible, she said. A title, a uniform, a corner office, a position at the top of a chart. Her eyes moved briefly across the operations floor. That makes life simpler. People like knowing exactly who is in charge. Agent Melissa Turner folded her arms. And you are saying that is not how it works? Charlotte offered a faint smile. I am saying reality is usually more complicated. She shifted the folder slightly beneath her arm. This morning, everyone believed the security response was the most important event happening in this building. The investigation, the lockdown, the deployment of a SEAL team. She glanced toward Ethan. You believed you were sent here to solve a problem. Ethan said nothing. Charlotte continued. The truth is that the problem had already been solved before you arrived. Several analysts exchanged confused looks. Turner frowned. Then why were we here at all? Charlotte answered immediately. Because the solution required verification. Verification of what? Charlotte looked toward the large windows overlooking the city. Lights now stretched across the evening skyline. Verification that every safeguard functioned exactly as intended. Ethan felt the pieces beginning to connect. Not fully, but enough to recognize the shape of what had happened. The network irregularities, he said quietly. Charlotte nodded. Part of a scheduled assessment. The executive review? Part of the assessment. The restricted records? Also part of the assessment. Turner blinked. You mean this entire operation was planned? Charlotte met her eyes. For months. The statement landed like a weight across the room. Ethan suddenly understood why every search had failed. Why every authorization request had been blocked. Why senior officials had become involved. The operation had never been designed to uncover Charlotte Hayes. It had been designed around her. One of the analysts stepped forward before he could stop himself. Who are you? Charlotte looked at him kindly. Someone whose job requires very little public attention. Ethan remembered the words from the classified archive. Strategic asset operating under direct executive authorization. Now they finally made sense. Charlotte was not a target. She was not a witness. She was not even an observer. She was the person coordinating the assessment from inside the building. The realization spread through the hallway as others reached the same conclusion. Turner stared at Charlotte. You were running the operation. Part of it. And the executive review. Evaluating the results. Ethan shook his head slowly. Including our response. Charlotte's smile widened slightly. Especially your response. Silence returned once more. This time it felt different. The uncertainty was gone. In its place came understanding. The woman they had investigated all day was never beneath the operation. She existed above it. Not through rank. Not through public authority. Through responsibility. Through trust placed in her by people whose names never appeared on organizational charts. Charlotte checked her watch one final time. The review board should be finishing shortly. Ethan looked at her carefully. And what happens now? Charlotte turned toward the elevator. Now everyone goes back to work. The elevator doors remained open as Charlotte Hayes stepped inside, but before they could close, Commander Ethan Brooks spoke one final time. Charlotte. She paused and looked back. The hallway had become completely silent. Agents, analysts, supervisors, and SEAL operators stood watching. Earlier that morning they had viewed her as an unknown variable sitting quietly inside a conference room. Now they understood that the entire day had unfolded around responsibilities they had never been meant to see. Ethan took a step closer. Why stay, he asked. If you could have monitored everything remotely, why sit in that room all day? Charlotte considered the question. Then she smiled slightly. Because reports never tell the whole story. Ethan nodded slowly. Somehow that answer made perfect sense. Throughout his career, he had learned the same lesson. Data mattered. Intelligence mattered. Procedures mattered. But people mattered more. Charlotte glanced across the operations floor one last time. Employees had already begun returning to their normal routines. Phones were ringing again. Conversations were resuming. Computer screens were filling with ordinary work instead of urgent searches. The building was slowly returning to normal. Yet everyone who had witnessed the day's events knew they would remember them for a very long time. Agent Melissa Turner stepped forward. So all of this was an evaluation. Charlotte shook her head gently. Not all of it. Turner frowned. What does that mean? Evaluations measure systems, Charlotte replied. Today also measured people. The words settled heavily across the hallway. Turner thought back to the analysts who refused to stop searching for answers. The supervisors who remained focused despite uncertainty. The operators who followed procedure even when frustrated. For the first time, she realized that every reaction throughout the day had revealed something important. Not just about security protocols. About character. About judgment. About trust. Ethan folded his arms. And what was the result? Charlotte looked directly at him. The result is that the safeguards worked. Several people exchanged relieved glances. Charlotte continued. Questions were asked. Procedures were followed. Assumptions were challenged. Nobody took shortcuts. Her eyes moved briefly toward the operations floor. That matters more than most people realize. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then one of the younger analysts finally gathered enough courage to ask the question everyone had been wondering. Will we ever see you again? A few people smiled. Charlotte looked at him kindly. Probably not. The answer drew quiet laughter throughout the hallway. Then she added, which is usually a sign that everything is working exactly as it should. The elevator doors began closing. Ethan watched as Charlotte adjusted the folder beneath her arm. One last thing, he said. The doors paused. What? Charlotte asked. Ethan thought back to the confusion, the restricted records, the endless dead ends, and the phone call that had changed everything. Then he shook his head and smiled. Nothing. Charlotte nodded as though she understood. Take care, Commander. The doors closed. A second later, the elevator disappeared down the shaft. For several moments, nobody moved. Then the spell finally broke. Analysts returned to their desks. Supervisors resumed meetings. Operators checked in with their teams. The building came alive again. Ethan remained where he was, looking at the empty elevator doors. The entire day had begun with a simple assumption. Everyone believed the visible authority in the room represented the highest level of power. They had been wrong. Sometimes the most important person in the building does not wear a uniform. Sometimes the individual carrying the greatest responsibility is the one nobody notices. And sometimes the people who truly shape events never need to announce who they are at all. As Ethan finally turned and walked back toward the operations floor, he found himself remembering something Charlotte had said hours earlier. Most people imagine power as something visible. After today, he knew better. Real influence rarely introduces itself. Real authority rarely demands attention. And the people entrusted with the most important missions are often the ones confident enough to sit quietly in a room while everyone else tries to figure out who they are.